Welcome back to Dark Revenge Chronicles, where the line between justice and vengeance blurs like smoke in the darkness. Today's story will take you on a journey through the deepest pits of human cruelty and the highest peaks of transformative revenge. They say that trauma either breaks you or makes you. But what happens when someone decides to use their breaking as the foundation for something greater? What happens when revenge becomes not just personal satisfaction, but a force that saves countless others? This is the story of Dr. Amelia Cross, a woman who died at the age of 16 and spent the next 20 years planning her resurrection. A story of systematic abuse, calculated revenge, and the thin line between justice and obsession. Dramatic pause. But I must warn you, this story contains themes of child abuse, trafficking, and psychological torture. Yet it also contains something rarer in these dark chronicles: hope. Because sometimes the phoenix that rises from the ashes doesn't just save itself. Sometimes it burns down the entire corrupt system that created it. 16 years ago, Amelia Cross was what you might call a golden child. Straight A's, captain of the debate team, already accepted to Harvard with a full scholarship. She lived in a beautiful house in an affluent neighborhood with parents who were pillars of the community. Dr. Richard Cross was a respected pediatric surgeon who had saved countless children's lives. Margaret Cross was a prominent child psychologist who ran a foundation for at-risk youth. They were the perfect family, photographed for magazine articles about successful parenting and featured at charity galas. But behind the mahogany doors of the Cross mansion, Amelia was dying a slow death. The abuse had started when Amelia was 8 years old, but it wasn't what you might expect. Dr. Richard Cross never laid a hand on his daughter in anger. Margaret Cross never screamed or threatened. Instead, they did something far more insidious. They systematically erased Amelia's sense of self. You exist for a purpose. Amelia, her mother would tell her during their daily therapy sessions in the basement office. Your feelings, your wants, your dreams, they're irrelevant. You are a tool to be shaped, nothing more. The Crosses had built their reputation on helping children, but their own daughter was their greatest victim. They used her as a test subject for psychological manipulation techniques, as a prop in their public appearances, and as a source of organic material for Dr. Cross's underground medical experiments. You see, Dr. Richard Cross wasn't just saving children during his day job. At night, he was part of an elite network of medical professionals who trafficked in human experimentation. Wealthy clients would pay millions for procedures tested on unwilling subjects, procedures that required young, healthy test subjects. Amelia discovered the truth when she was 14, hidden in her father's study, reading medical files she wasn't supposed to see, files with names, ages, and what had been done to them. Children who had gone missing from foster care, runaways who wouldn't be missed, foreign children brought in through trafficking networks, and at the center of each file was her father's signature. But the most horrifying discovery wasn't what her father was doing to other children. It was what he was planning to do to her. Amelia found her own file, thick with medical records, psychological evaluations, and something called the Phoenix Protocol. She was being prepared for something her father called the ultimate procedure, a complete psychological breakdown and reconstruction that would turn her into the perfect victim for his clients. The Phoenix Protocol was Dr. Cross's masterpiece. Take a child, systematically destroy their personality and sense of self, then rebuild them into whatever the client desired. A perfect servant, a willing victim, a living doll programmed for any purpose. Amelia was to be the prototype. That night, 16-year-old Amelia Cross made a decision that would echo through the next 20 years of her life. She couldn't run. Her parents were too connected, too powerful. She couldn't go to the police. Half the local force was in her father's pocket. She couldn't even trust the child services workers. Many of them were clients of her father's network. But she could disappear. And in disappearing, she could become something her father never expected, his worst nightmare. Amelia Cross staged her own death with the meticulous planning of someone who had been trained by monsters to think like a monster. She used her mother's psychology training and her father's medical knowledge against them. A car accident on a rainy night. A body burned beyond recognition. DNA evidence that matched because Amelia had spent months collecting and planting her own biological material at the crash site. even dental records that matched because she had been stealing and replacing her own dental x-rays for over a year. The funeral of Amelia Cross was attended by hundreds of people who thought they were mourning a bright young woman taken too soon. But in reality, they were attending the birth ceremony of something far more dangerous. A ghost with a 20-year plan for revenge. The girl who died in that car crash had been a victim. The woman who walked away from her own funeral was something else entirely. A weapon shaped by trauma and hardened by purpose, and she had 2 decades to perfect her aim. For 3 years after her death, the woman who had been Amelia Cross lived like a ghost. She survived by using skills her parents had inadvertently taught her. How to manipulate people, how to read psychological vulnerabilities, how to become whatever someone needed her to be. But she wasn't just surviving, she was learning. Using forged documents and a carefully constructed identity, she enrolled in online courses under the name Sarah Phoenix, a name chosen with deliberate irony. While her parents thought she was dead and buried, she was acquiring the tools she would need for her resurrection: computer programming, forensic accounting, investigative journalism, criminal psychology, corporate law, digital security. She absorbed knowledge with the single-minded focus of someone preparing for war. But most importantly, she was mapping her enemy's territory. Dr. Richard Cross hadn't mourned his daughter's death for long. Within 6 months, he had resumed his underground operations with renewed vigor. The Phoenix Protocol, originally designed for Amelia, was adapted for other victims. The network had grown, becoming more sophisticated, more profitable, and more dangerous. Sarah Phoenix spent 3 years documenting every aspect of her father's operation. She learned the names of his clients, his co-conspirators, his victims. She traced money flows, identified safe houses, and cataloged crimes going back decades. But she also discovered something that changed everything. The network was far larger than she had imagined. Dr. Cross wasn't a ringleader. He was middle management in an international organization that trafficked in human experimentation, organ harvesting, and psychological programming. The operation spanned multiple countries, involved hundreds of medical professionals, and had claimed thousands of victims over the years. Sarah Phoenix realized that simply destroying her father wouldn't be enough. She needed to burn down the entire network, and to do that, she needed to become someone they would never suspect. At 19, Sarah Phoenix emerged from the shadows with a new identity and a brilliant plan. She had manufactured a complete background for herself. Orphaned at 16 in a car accident, raised by a distant relative, brilliant student despite her tragic circumstances. She enrolled at Stanford University under her new identity, excelling in both pre-med and computer science. But more importantly, she began building the network she would need for her long-term plan. Sarah had learned something crucial during her years in hiding. She couldn't defeat monsters by becoming one herself. Instead, she needed to become something her father's network had never encountered before, a force for genuine good that was smarter, more organized, and more ruthless than they were. She started small. During her college years, Sarah began identifying and helping other victims of the network: runaway teenagers who were being targeted by recruiters, foster children who had been flagged for special programs, foreign exchange students who had disappeared from their host families. Sarah would find them, warn them, and help them disappear safely. But she also did something more. She began documenting everything, building a case that would eventually bring down the entire operation. Dr. Sarah Phoenix proved to be everything Dr. Marcus Webb could have wanted in a protege. Brilliant, dedicated, seemingly without moral boundaries when it came to advancing medical science. Within 6 months of starting her residency, she had become Webb's most trusted assistant. But Sarah wasn't just excelling at surgery. She was documenting everything. The network operated through what appeared to be legitimate medical research. Experimental procedures on children who were deemed terminal anyway, clinical trials that pushed ethical boundaries in the name of scientific advancement, medical tourism programs that brought wealthy clients to facilities where anything was possible for the right price. Sarah participated in procedures that made her soul scream, but she endured it because each operation, each consultation, each private meeting gave her more evidence. She wore hidden cameras, recorded conversations, and documented every crime being committed under the guise of healing. But she also began her own experiments, psychological ones. Sarah had learned from her mother's techniques, and she began using them on the network members themselves. She would identify their insecurities, their fears, their weaknesses, and then slowly manipulate them into making mistakes. Dr. Webb, for instance, was terrified of losing his reputation. Sarah began subtly undermining his confidence while simultaneously building him up. She would praise his work publicly, while privately expressing concerns about certain procedures. She would support his decisions while making sure he doubted himself. The result was that Webb began making increasingly desperate decisions to prove his competence. Decisions that left him more exposed and more vulnerable to eventual prosecution. Music becomes more complex, showing the intricate nature of the manipulation. But Sarah's masterstroke during this period wasn't psychological manipulation. It was technological infiltration. Using her computer science background, Sarah had developed what she called the FAKED system, a hidden network that could penetrate any digital system connected to the internet. Over the course of 2 years, she installed hidden monitoring software on every computer, phone, and device used by network members. The FAKED system was more than just surveillance. It was designed to learn, to adapt, and to eventually act autonomously. Sarah was building a digital weapon that could simultaneously gather evidence, protect victims, and coordinate attacks on the network's infrastructure. Meanwhile, Sarah was also expanding her legitimate rescue operations. Using information gathered from her infiltration, she would identify children who were being targeted by the network and arrange for them to be removed to safety. But she had to be careful. Too many successful interventions and the network would realize they had been compromised. So Sarah developed a system of seemingly random rescues that appeared to be the result of luck, coincidence, or the children's own initiative. Music shifts to more hopeful tones. A foster child would suddenly be moved to a different placement just before recruiters arrived. A teenage runaway would find an anonymous envelope with bus money and the address of a legitimate shelter. A foreign exchange student would receive a scholarship to a different program in a safer location. Over 2 years, Sarah's system saved over 200 children from becoming victims of the network. But more importantly, she was building something larger, a legitimate organization that could continue her work. The Phoenix Foundation was established as a nonprofit focused on child protection and medical ethics. Publicly, it was just another charity run by idealistic young doctors. Privately, it was the operational base for Sarah's war against her father's network. The foundation provided legitimate cover for Sarah's activities, while also creating a sustainable system for protecting vulnerable children. She recruited doctors, lawyers, social workers, and law enforcement officers who were genuinely committed to child protection, though most had no idea about the larger war they were supporting. Dramatic pause. But as successful as Sarah's infiltration had been, she knew it couldn't last forever. The network was becoming suspicious of the increasing number of coincidences that were disrupting their operations. More dangerously, her father had begun to take notice of Dr. Sarah Phoenix. Dr. Richard Cross had heard about the brilliant young surgeon who was making waves in pediatric medicine. He had even met her briefly at a medical conference, though he hadn't recognized the daughter he thought was dead. But Sarah knew it was only a matter of time before someone made the connection. Her face had changed in the 7 years since her supposed death, but not enough to fool someone who had known her intimately. She needed to accelerate her timeline. Phase 3 of her plan, the direct confrontation, would have to begin sooner than anticipated. The problem was that a direct assault on the network would only succeed if she could simultaneously strike at every level of the organization, miss even a few key players, and they would disappear, reorganize, and resume operations elsewhere. Sarah needed something that would expose everyone at once, something that would make their crimes so public and so undeniable that there would be no possibility of escape or cover-up. She needed to orchestrate the largest coordinated takedown of a criminal organization in history, and she needed to do it while maintaining her cover until the very last moment. Music transitions to more urgent rhythms. But Sarah Phoenix had spent 10 years preparing for this moment. She had the evidence, the technology, the network, and the plan. All she needed now was the perfect catalyst, something that would force her father and his associates to make the kinds of mistakes that would bring their entire world crashing down, and she knew exactly what that catalyst would be: the return of Amelia Cross. Dr. Richard Cross received the email on a Tuesday morning that would change everything. The sender was listed as A. Cross, and the subject line simply read, "Phoenix Protocol Activation." Inside was a single sentence: "Hello, Daddy. Did you miss me?" Dr. Cross's hands shook as he stared at the message. It was impossible. Amelia had died 10 years ago. He had identified the body himself, had seen the dental records, had attended the funeral. But the phrase Phoenix Protocol was known only to a handful of people, and the tone of the message, it was exactly how Amelia used to talk to him before her death. That particular combination of defiance and intelligence that had made her such a perfect candidate for the protocol. Dr. Cross immediately called Dr. Webb and the other core members of the network. Within hours, an emergency meeting was convened at their secure facility in upstate New York. But what Dr. Cross didn't know was that Sarah Phoenix had been planning this moment for 10 years. The email wasn't just psychological warfare. It was the opening move in a coordinated attack that would unfold over the next 72 hours. As the network members gathered for their emergency meeting, Sarah activated the Phoenix system. Across the country, her hidden surveillance network began recording everything: every phone call, every email, every panicked conversation, as the leadership tried to figure out how Amelia Cross could possibly be alive. But Sarah wasn't done with psychological manipulation. Over the next 24 hours, each core member of the network received personalized messages that seemed to come from Amelia. Dr. Webb received medical files detailing procedures he had performed on victims, along with the message, "I remember everything you did to Sarah Martinez. She was only 12. Dr. Patricia Holbrook, the network's child psychologist, received recordings of her own voice from sessions where she had broken children's minds, accompanied by, "You taught me well, doctor. Now let me teach you about fear." Each message was designed to trigger maximum psychological distress while also forcing the network members to incriminate themselves with their responses, and it worked perfectly. The network members began making desperate phone calls, sending panicked emails, and meeting in person to discuss damage control. But every communication was being recorded by the Phoenix system. Every meeting was being monitored. Every moment of panic was being documented. More importantly, their desperation was causing them to make exactly the kinds of mistakes Sarah had been waiting for. Dr. Cross ordered the immediate destruction of evidence, but his instructions were intercepted and documented. Dr. Webb tried to warn active operations to shut down, but his communications were recorded and traced. Dr. Holbrook attempted to eliminate current victims who might testify against them, but her orders were captured and forwarded to law enforcement. Meanwhile, Sarah was playing her most dangerous role yet. As Dr. Sarah Phoenix, she attended the emergency network meeting, expressing concern about the security breach while secretly recording everything. "Whoever this is, they know too much," she said during the meeting, her voice steady despite the fact that she was staring directly at her father for the first time in 10 years. "We need to assume they have access to everything." Dr. Cross studied her face carefully. Something about her seemed familiar, but he couldn't place it. The woman sitting across from him was confident, composed, clearly brilliant. Nothing like the broken teenager he had been preparing for the Phoenix Protocol. "Do you have any suggestions, Dr. Phoenix?" he asked. Sarah smiled, the same smile Amelia used to give him when she was planning something. "I think we should give them exactly what they want." Dramatic pause. "And what's that?" "A demonstration of what happens to people who threaten this organization." The room fell silent. Sarah continued, her voice taking on the cold, clinical tone she had learned from watching her father operate. "If Amelia Cross is really alive, then she's been planning this for years. She knows too much to be simply eliminated quietly, but she's also proven that she's emotionally compromised. Otherwise, she would have gone to the authorities instead of playing games." Sarah paused, letting her words sink in. "I propose we give her what she's really after, a confrontation with her father. But we control the terms. We bring her here, to our facility, where we can ensure the outcome." Dr. Cross leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. Go on, we respond to her message. We tell her we're willing to meet, to discuss terms. She won't be able to resist. And when she arrives, Sarah let the implication hang in the air. The Phoenix Protocol was always meant for her anyway. We just postpone her death by a few hours while we extract everything she knows about her organization. Then we eliminate her properly this time. The plan was approved unanimously. The network members were so desperate and so panicked that they agreed to Sarah's proposal without considering the possibility that it might be a trap. They had no idea that Dr. Sarah Phoenix was Amelia Cross. They had no idea that she had spent 10 years planning for this exact moment. And they certainly had no idea that in 48 hours, their entire organization would be destroyed by the very woman sitting at their conference table. Sarah Phoenix had achieved something remarkable. She had convinced her targets to participate in their own destruction. But the most dangerous part of her plan was still ahead. In 2 days, she would have to reveal her true identity to her father, while surrounded by the most dangerous criminals she had ever encountered. And if even a single element of her plan failed, she wouldn't just fail in her mission of revenge. She would become the final victim of the Phoenix Protocol, the very fate she had been running from for 10 years. The stage was set. The trap was baited, and Amelia Cross was finally ready to rise from the ashes. The confrontation was scheduled for midnight on a Friday at the network's most secure facility, a converted medical complex in the mountains of upstate New York. To the network members, it felt like the perfect trap, isolated, controllable, equipped with everything they would need to break Amelia Cross and extract her secrets. But Sarah Phoenix had been planning for this moment for 10 years, and she had no intention of walking into their trap unprepared. For 72 hours before the meeting, the Phoenix system had been working overtime. Every security camera in the facility had been compromised. Every communication system had been infiltrated. Every electronic device had been turned into a surveillance tool. More importantly, Sarah had activated what she called the Phoenix Protocol Reversal, a coordinated operation involving law enforcement agencies across multiple states, international child protection organizations, and investigative journalists from major news networks. But the most crucial element of her plan was something none of them expected. She wasn't coming alone. Over the past 10 years, Sarah had saved hundreds of children from the network's clutches, but she had also done something more. She had helped many of them heal, grow, and become powerful adults in their own right. Dr. Lisa Chen had been rescued from the network at age 14 and was now a federal prosecutor, specializing in human trafficking cases. Special Agent Marcus Rivera had been saved from a recruitment operation at 16 and was now one of the FBI's top experts on organized crime. Judge Patricia Walsh had been a victim of the network's psychological programming and was now positioned to ensure that justice would be swift and comprehensive. Sarah's rescue operations hadn't just saved individual children. She had been building an army of allies, all of whom had personal reasons to see the network destroyed. And tonight, that army was moving into position. At 11:30 p.m., Dr. Sarah Phoenix arrived at the facility alone, exactly as planned. She was searched, scanned, and escorted to the main conference room where Dr. Richard Cross and his core associates were waiting. "Dr. Phoenix," Dr. Cross said, his voice carefully controlled. "I trust our guest will be arriving shortly?" Sarah smiled. "Oh, she's already here." Before anyone could react, Sarah reached up and removed the contact lenses that had been changing her eye color for 10 years. She pulled off the prosthetic pieces that had altered her nose and cheekbones. She straightened her posture, letting her true personality show through for the first time in a decade. "Hello, Daddy," Amelia Cross said, her voice carrying 10 years of rage and determination. "Did you think I was really dead?" The room exploded into chaos. Dr. Cross staggered backward as if he had seen a ghost, which, in a sense, he had. Dr. Webb reached for his phone to call security. Dr. Holbrook began backing toward the exit, but Amelia wasn't finished. "I wouldn't try to leave if I were you," she said calmly. "You see, for the past 72 hours, every word you've spoken, every email you've sent, every crime you've committed has been recorded and transmitted to federal law enforcement agencies in 12 states. She gestured to the walls around them. "This facility is currently surrounded by FBI agents ATF officers, and international law enforcement. Every escape route has been blocked. Every communication system has been compromised. Every piece of evidence you thought you had destroyed has been recovered. Dr. Cross found his voice. That's impossible. You're just one person. You can't— One person? Amelia laughed, and the sound was both bitter and triumphant. Daddy, you trained me to think systematically, to plan long-term, to use people's weaknesses against them. Did you really think I would waste those skills? She pulled out a tablet and showed them a series of live video feeds. FBI agents were simultaneously raiding facilities in 8 different states. International operations were being shut down in 4 countries. Bank accounts were being frozen. Arrest warrants were being executed. Over the past 10 years, I've documented over 3,000 crimes committed by this network. I've identified 847 victims and helped 623 of them escape. I've traced money flows through 23 different countries and identified every single person involved in your operation. Amelia's voice grew stronger, more confident. But more than that, I've spent 10 years building something you never understood. A legitimate organization dedicated to protecting children. The Phoenix Foundation now operates in 31 states and 12 countries. We have resources, connections, and legal authority that your little network of monsters could never match. Dr. Cross was staring at his daughter as if seeing her for the first time. You destroyed everything. Decades of work, billions of dollars in assets. I destroyed a criminal enterprise built on the suffering of children, Amelia corrected. And I did it using the very skills you taught me. You wanted to create a weapon with the Phoenix Protocol? Congratulations, Daddy. You succeeded. You just didn't realize the weapon would be pointed at you. The facility's doors burst open as federal agents swarmed in. But Amelia wasn't done with her father yet. Do you want to know the beautiful part of all this? She asked as handcuffs were placed on Dr. Cross's wrists. Every child you saved during your day job, every life you genuinely helped, that's real. That goodness exists. But it doesn't balance out the evil you've done. It just makes your crimes more tragic. She paused, studying her father's face as he was led away. I could have become like you, after what you did to me. After what I've seen over the past 10 years. I could have become a monster. But I chose something different. I chose to be better than the people who broke me. Dr. Cross stopped struggling against his restraints. And what exactly have you become, Amelia? Amelia smiled, and for the first time in 10 years, it was a genuine expression of peace. Free. The arrests that night were just the beginning. Over the following months, the evidence compiled by the Phoenix system led to the prosecution of 347 individuals across 12 countries. The network's assets, totaling over $2.3 billion, were seized and used to fund victim compensation and child protection programs worldwide. Dr. Richard Cross was convicted on 23 counts of murder, 156 counts of child abuse, and numerous charges related to human trafficking and medical fraud. He was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. But for Amelia Cross, the legal victories were less important than the human ones. The Phoenix Foundation, no longer operating in secret, became one of the most effective child protection organizations in the world. The methods Amelia had developed for identifying and rescuing at-risk children were adopted by law enforcement agencies globally. More importantly, the hundreds of victims who had been saved over the years were finally able to heal openly, with full support and resources. Lisa Chen, the federal prosecutor, led a special task force dedicated to dismantling similar networks around the world. Marcus Rivera founded a training program to teach law enforcement officers how to identify trafficking operations. Patricia Walsh established a court specializing in crimes against children, ensuring that justice would be both swift and compassionate. Each person who had been saved by Amelia's network became a force for protecting others. The ripple effects of her 20-year plan continued to spread, creating a web of protection that would safeguard countless children for generations to come. Music becomes more complex, showing the expanding impact. But perhaps the most important transformation was in Amelia herself. For 20 years, she had been driven by rage, by the need for revenge, by the desire to make her father pay for what he had done. The pursuit of justice had consumed her life, shaped every decision, motivated every action. Now, with her father in prison and his network destroyed, Amelia had to confront a question she had never allowed herself to ask. Who was she when she wasn't defined by revenge? The answer came slowly, through therapy, through relationships with other survivors, through the daily work of building something positive rather than destroying something negative. Amelia discovered that she was more than the sum of her trauma. She was brilliant, compassionate, creative, and capable of love. She was someone who could inspire others, who could lead with wisdom rather than rage, who could build rather than tear down. 3 years after the raids, Dr. Amelia Cross, she had legally reclaimed her original name, stood before a gathering of child protection advocates from around the world. "I want to talk to you about the difference between revenge and justice," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had lived both. Revenge is about making someone else feel the pain you feel. It's about balancing the scales through suffering. And I won't lie to you. There was a time when revenge was all that kept me alive. She paused, looking out at the audience of social workers, law enforcement officers, and survivors. But justice is about preventing others from experiencing that pain. It's about building systems that protect the vulnerable, rather than just punishing those who harm them. Justice is about creating a world where the next potential victim doesn't become a victim at all. Amelia's voice grew stronger. For 20 years, I thought I was pursuing justice. But if I'm honest, I was pursuing revenge. The justice happened almost by accident. It was the byproduct of my desire to make my father suffer. The real justice came after the revenge was complete. It came when I realized that my skills, my resources, and my experience could be used to protect children, rather than just punish their abusers. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that revenge is wrong. Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps us fighting when everything else has been taken away. But I am going to tell you that revenge alone is never enough. If you want to truly defeat the monsters of this world, you don't just have to destroy them. You have to build something better in their place. You have to become living proof that their victims can rise above their trauma and create something beautiful. Amelia looked directly into the cameras recording the speech. To anyone who has survived trauma, who has been broken by those who should have protected them, who has spent their nights planning revenge, I see you. I understand. Your rage is valid. Your pain is real. Your desire for justice is righteous. But don't let your past define your future. Use your trauma as fuel, but don't let it become your destination. Rise from the ashes, yes, but rise toward something better, not just something destructive. The audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. 5 years have passed since the fall of Dr. Richard Cross's network. The Phoenix Foundation now operates in 47 countries and has helped rescue over 10,000 children from various forms of exploitation and abuse. Dr. Amelia Cross serves as the Foundation's Director of Strategic Operations, but she's no longer the broken teenager who faked her own death or the revenge-obsessed woman who spent 20 years planning her father's downfall. She's become something rarer and more powerful, a survivor who transformed her trauma into a force for protecting others. But the most remarkable part of Amelia's story isn't her elaborate revenge or her successful takedown of a criminal network. It's what happened after the revenge was complete. Amelia chose to visit her father in prison. The meeting took place in a sterile visiting room, separated by bulletproof glass. Dr. Richard Cross, now in his 70s, looked nothing like the powerful surgeon who had once terrified his daughter. Prison had aged him rapidly, and his hands shook as he picked up the phone. "Hello, Daddy," Amelia said, her voice calm and steady. Dr. Cross stared at her for a long moment. "Why are you here?" "Because I wanted you to see who I became despite what you did to me," Amelia replied. "I wanted you to understand that your greatest failure wasn't getting caught. It was believing that breaking someone means destroying them forever." She leaned forward slightly. "You thought you were creating a victim with your Phoenix protocol, but you were actually creating something much more dangerous, a person who understood trauma intimately and chose to use that understanding to help others rather than perpetuate the cycle." Dr. Cross's voice was barely a whisper. Do you forgive me?" Amelia considered the question carefully. "No," she said finally. "What you did was unforgivable. But I've stopped letting your crimes define my life. I've stopped giving you power over my choices. That's not forgiveness. That's freedom." She stood to leave, then turned back. The Phoenix Foundation has helped save thousands of children in the 5 years since your arrest. Every child we save, every family we heal, every system we improve. That's your legacy too.